in the last 3 years, 4 years, maybe, we've been talking about, the CNMI government has been talking about streamlining government services. And part of the intent of this leadership is to eliminate all these talking and trying to start putting action into a lot of this talks, rather than the discussion. And OMB seems to be a hot topic just because it was created through an executive order back in 1994. So makes it a little bit more easier just because it's not a constitutional mandate. So for me and the leadership, and by the way, this was introduced back in, I want to say maybe the 2022, 2021. Of course, it didn't make it through. However, I'm going to go ahead and try and push it through, whether the House accepts it or approves it, or the governor. One of the things that we want to do is we want to just, put action to a lot of these talks, and create streamlines in the government so we can reduce expenditures in the government.
And are you talking about downsizing or removing redundant processes? Can you just explain how it looks?
So it's not removing employees, it's just removing redundancy. For example, if you were to do a personnel action, there's 5 individuals that got to sign off on this personnel action. So from the time somebody applies for a job to the time he actually gets hired, sometimes takes 6 months. I don't understand why. Back in 1994, our population was almost 70,000 people. Now we're roughly about 3,000 people. 43,000 people. So we're reducing in population, yet the government size is still the same. So if we're wondering how we reduce expenditure, we got to start stacking these agencies and utilize the same operational expenditure. I'm talking about, sharing resources, because we cannot keep increasing taxes and making our consumers or our constituents pay for all these services that are just redundant. So that's really the intent on this. It's not necessarily it's not an attack on OMB, it's not an attack on any government agency, but rather just to find a amicable solution where we can try and, remove some of this redundancy and start stacking our government agencies and start sharing resources.
And so is the idea that those other people who usually had to process, they'll be freed up to do other things?
Absolutely. So if you think of it this way, if you put, with the amount of pressure that the Secretary of Finance has with all these financial discrepancy, right, in the CNMI, if you move these 2 agencies together, now you got more manpower to actually start tackling a lot of these issues. At the same time, a projection for budget for the fiscal year and monitoring that projection, it's still, because it becomes a division under the Secretary of Finance. And by the way, the Secretary of Finance is a constitutional mandate that, is the authority figure that manages our finances in the CNMI. OMB was just created to kind of start working on, annual projection, but as I understand it, the Secretary of Finance still generates its own projection and sends that to the Office of Management and Budget. And what happens there is they look at those projections and they work with the governor, right? And either adjust the numbers based on their projection. So it's really a redundant work, right? So putting it together is really not going to eliminate the process of projection. It's really just going to streamline this process and start removing, start removing power, with different agencies. For example, there's 3 branches of government. The problem is OMB gets to decide when you yank the judicial branch's funding, the legislative branch's funding on the fly without any notification, and we still have to execute our fiduciary responsibility, which is a constitutional mandate. But the power lies with OMB, and it just baffles a lot of legislators, the judicial branch, to just give that much power to one individual. To say that there's a possibility of corruption in that is, I don't agree with that statement, because the Secretary of Finance is still bound to the law, and we still have to follow the procurement law, the projections of funding. So it's not necessarily going to remove a check and balance, because the legislature is the power of the purse, right? Any projection comes to the legislature, we go thoroughly through all these projection, and we bring in agencies and talk about their needs, and we start filtering this. Then from there, we approve the budget here and move it back to the executive branch for them to execute this budget. So that's kind of the process. I just refuse to sit and not do anything about a lot of these issues and financial situation that we're having. And by the way, OMB is not the first. There's other agencies that we're looking at, but the challenge is, of course, some of them are protected by the Constitution, right? The line agencies that are created by the Constitution, so we can't just legislate and remove that. But OMB is, again, created by an executive order, which we can just legislate, and it's a lot less complex.
So what's the status of the bill? It hasn't been introduced yet? Or?
Oh, the bill is already introduced. The next process would be I'm going to refer it to the committee and allow them to do their part and start bringing in all these agencies and having these conversations about this bill. This is not necessarily saying that we introduce it, we're going to pass it. It's of course it's a process. We're gonna take our time on that process and make sure that we do it right. So again, I just want to reiterate that this is not an attack on any agency. It's just trying to streamline the government and figure out how do we make it more efficient for our people.